Yeah, we're live and we're starting early, actually 12 minutes early. So we're getting going. If you guys haven't, if you guys are tuning in, make sure to go take a look if you're tuning in live. Uncle Tony has Steve Magnanti on there, and Steve's a great guy. He's done lots of cool stuff. So I was over there for a little while checking that out. He's a good guy, and I'm sure a good interview. I wish I could watch more of it, but unfortunately, I'm taking care of my guys because that's what it's all about. So tonight we're first in, yes. So tonight we're going to talk about the video that I put up on the intake manifold testing, where we tested different runner lengths and we tested them NA and under boost. And I've gone over this a lot, and most of the guys that are going to be here live know that when we change the runner length, that it changes the effective operating range of the motor, and that it does that NA, and that it also does that under boost. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but what I want to talk about is a specific point on this, and I need to look in more detail on exactly what was going on with the tune or air temperature or things like that, because something happened and I glossed over it a little bit in the video, in the conclusion of the video, about why the intake manifold did what it did, or that it did something that I was not expecting. So we'll go over that. But for the people that are just joining, and if you're watching this video to find out about what intake manifolds do, intake manifolds do the same thing, NA and under boost. Doesn't matter whether it's turbo, whether it's a roots blower, or whether it's, in this case, a centrifugal blower. This is a Procharger, an intercooled Procharger that we ran the test on. So, this is actually a video or a test that I did for the guys at Engine Masters, or with the guys at Engine Masters, where we compared the adjustable intake manifold, and we ran it NA on a 408, and then we ran it under boost to show the differences in the intake manifold. Because a lot of guys, and especially when we add boost to the equation, think that, oh, well, when we add boost, all of the stuff goes out the window. You just want a cool short runner manifold that's going to make more power. And a lot of times it does. A lot of times the short runner manifold does indeed make more peak power. And we saw that at least on the supercharged version of that, which is the thing we're going to get to. But we see that sometimes, but almost always when you compare, and we throw out these descriptions, long runner and short runner, but in this case it's actually very appropriate, because the intake manifold that we used was a fast adjustable intake manifold. So you pull the lid off, and there are runners that bolt into the lower part of the manifold, and you can change which runner set you use, because they were very clever in their design. You can use the long crisscrossing runners, which are basically typical of the way that particular manifold had been offered before in the past, as a long runner deal with the clamshell lid on it. And then they also offered the same thing basically with an LSXRT upper manifold. And as a side point, I did a test, and we did this with the short runners. We ran because the lids are interchangeable in this case on the adjustable manifold, so we could effectively just change plenum volume, which was also very cool. Unfortunately, it really didn't do anything. It made almost no change in the curve at all. So even though it was a fairly sizable change, because when you change from the long runners, which fill up most of the plenum, and then you go to the short runners, not only have you shortened the runners pretty dramatically in this case, but you've also you have a whole bunch of like open space in there now. So effectively you've also increased the plenum volume. And so I knew that I would get lots of comments from the people about that test. Well, yeah, you also changed the plenum volume, so that's where the power came from. And so I thought, well, and I wanted to find out myself if there is a big change in power from the plenum volume, which honestly I've never seen in the testing that I've done. So we put on the LSXRT with the short runner manifold, and I didn't include this in the video, but it's a test that we did. So we ran the LSXR versus the LSXRT, just the lid, same throttle body, all that same stuff, same runners. And we ran a back-to-back test, and basically it looked like we just ran made another pull with the same runner or with the same manifold, because it really didn't change anything at all. So the plenum volume didn't do very much, but the runner length does a lot. So when you go from the long runner manifold, which in the case of this cammed 408 LS3 effectively, because it had factory LS3 heads on it, and it had a pretty good sized camshaft in it, but it made peak power at like 6,200 or 6,300 with the long runner manifold. So a lot of guys are thinking, well, it needs a shorter runner manifold so it can really rev out there and make power. Yes, that's a good idea. Well, and that's why we thought, on this particular application with this many cubic inches, it's got plenty of cylinder head to go with it. I mean, head flows 315 or so CFM, certainly it has the potential to make more power. So we ran the motor, and then we ran it NA, and then removed the long runners and put the red short runners in there and ran it again. And it does make more power at the top. But in the case of the NA motor, and this is the thing we're going to get into, in the case of the NA motor, it didn't make any more peak power. It just, where the other one fell off, that one kind of hung in there. It actually made 1 or 2 or 3 less horsepower with the short runner as a peak, but it just from 6,500 out to 7,000, let's say. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's in that range. But in that area, it just hung on and kind of stayed, fairly flat, whereas the long runner one fell off. But the problem is, below that point, like below 6,300 RPM, the long runner manifold just made more power from idle to, we obviously didn't test it idle, but I know guys want me to do that. From idle all the way up to 6,300 RPM, the long runner manifold made a lot more torque, and not like a little bit, but we're talking about as much as 40 or 45 or maybe even 50 foot-pounds of torque in certain areas. And there was a gain through the whole curve up until that crossover point. So the long runners offered a lot more average power. And then the thing that happened is, what I wanted to show is this trend would continue when we added boost. So we put a centrifugal supercharger on there. This was a Supercharger D1SC with an air-to-water intercooler. And when we ran and again, same air fuel, same timing, all of that stuff. So we ran the D1SC and then ran it with the long runners and then ran it with the short runners. And the interesting thing, and the reason why the long runners with the blower makes even more sense, despite the fact that the short runner made more peak power, is because on a centrifugal supercharger, when you add that to any motor, whether it's an LS or a Ford or a Buick or whatever it is, the centrifugal supercharger will artificially increase where the motor makes peak power. So it'll make it a higher revving motor. If in this case we were making peak power at 62 or 6,300 RPM, when we added the blower, because it has a rising boost curve, it changes where the thing makes peak power. So now with the blower, we were making peak power at, I want to say 67 or 6,800 RPM. The shift was 400 or 500 RPM higher now. So if you're looking at shifting at 7,000 RPM now with the blower, the long runner, and again, the long runner manifold makes more power than the short runner manifold from the crossover point all the way down. Same kind of thing, much more torque, all in that range. But the interesting thing, and I haven't run across this before, and that's why I want to go back and really look at this data to make sure that it was exactly the same air fuel and exactly the same timing and exactly the same temperature. It usually is. We're pretty good at the testing. But when we ran the motor naturally aspirated, it didn't really like the short runners. It didn't make any more peak power. When we did it with the blower, it actually made a little bit more peak power under boost with the short runner. Now it still lost power, for 90% of the curve from 6,300 on down. But and the crossover point was the same, NA and boosted within 100 RPM. So the manifold is doing the same thing. But I thought that the interesting thing in this test, and this is something that I just noticed in going back over this data, and I was looking at the peaks, and I'm like, well, the peak with the short runner is now higher than it was with the long runner, whereas when it was NA, it was not. And so one of the points that I made, one of the comments I made at the end of the video is that, well, did we find that this is actually a blower manifold? Now, have I been wrong all of these years in saying that manifolds are not boost specific? Because this would tend to indicate something else. And I want to look and kind of get an answer and figure out why that is. And again, even if it does make a little bit more power under boost, all of the other things are still happening in the same way. Like the crossover point's still the same. It still loses torque everywhere else. It's still doing exactly what we would expect. I just would like an answer to, now that I'm nitpicking at the curves and stuff, I want to look and see, hey, what's really going on there? Did we do something? Did we have a leak? And I don't know how it can change timing because we have to physically do that. I don't let the thing run in closed loop. I make sure that every run that the airfield is the same. And so I go back and look when we get a printout or a readout on the dyno and go, okay, look, this one is 11.8 and this one's 11.9 or whatever. And then we go in and adjust all of that. I don't allow the computer to adjust that while we're making the runs. Some guys like to do that, but I don't. I like to make one run and then make another run. The reason that I like to do that is I don't like it while it's adjusting. And also I want to see if there's a change from, like, let's say it's 11.5 and I want it to be 11.8. If I adjust it and make it 11.8, was there a change in power? Was it receptive to that kind of change in airfield going from, in this case, 11.5 to 11.8? Did that do anything? If it didn't change the power at all, then I can relay that information back to you guys and say, hey, look, in that range, it just was not like, you know, very receptive to changes in airfield. It wasn't sensitive to that at all. So, you know, I always try to err on the more conservative side when you're doing those kinds of tunes. Sometimes racers want to make it really spicy, but if you didn't get anything for doing that other than putting you closer to the danger zone, then I wouldn't recommend doing that. But I don't know if that's the case unless I actually do tests, and that's why I did that. So the interesting thing is, I made a little bit of a comparison in the video, that adding a centrifugal supercharger to a combination, because I've always told you guys that when we add boost to anything, all we're doing is kind of multiplying what's there. The centrifugal blower is a little bit weird like that, because it's easier to imagine if we take the power curve of, in this case is a 408, could be a 408, a 53, 60, whatever. If we take that power curve and just elevate the whole thing up, that's what boost from a turbo does. If we run 10 pounds and it's 10 pounds everywhere, we have a good turbo and it's responsive and it's doing everything it's supposed to, and it's able to hold 10 pounds all the way out with an electronic wastegate control or something, then the curve is going to be exactly the same. It's going to have the same dips and all that stuff is going to be there. It's going to fall off at the same point. All of that is going to be exactly the same. If you can manipulate the curve with your electronic controller and make it referenced by RPM, then you can adjust that. But that's exactly what a centrifugal blower does. The centrifugal blower also loses some of the power associated with driving the blower to make that airflow. So we get a little bit of a loss there. But the other thing that happens is in the centrifugal blower, in this case, on this motor with the Procharger, we had about 2.8 or 2.9 pounds at the start of the run. And then we had coming up 11.8 or 11.9 pounds at the top of the run. So it has a big, as I said, it has a rising boost curve. It's supplying more and more airflow. We see that as boost because it's just the amount of restriction that the motor cannot process that. Now it's getting more airflow and it's making more power. But as that increases, we see more and more flow. And that's why we extend the effective RPM range of these motors. And we saw this it was a good thing to have back in the day. I had a Vortec on my 5-liter Mustang. And if you had the factory HO manifold that made peak power very, very low, and then all of a sudden you had a blower, then it felt like, hey, this thing actually wants to rev out to 5,500 or 5,800 or something. And then if you put a cam and good heads in and stuff, then it was 6,000 or 6,500 or something with a good centrifugal blower on it. But on the other blowers, it doesn't do the same thing. You can, with a twin screw or even a roots blower, like a good sized TVS blower, you can also have a rising curve with those as well. Depending on what the displacement of the blower is relative to the displacement of the motor, and more importantly, the power output, the NA power output of the motor, because the higher that is, the lower the boost level is going to be at any given blower speed. The other thing that happens with roots blowers typically and twin screws is that the intake manifold that they use on those, that's why with a roots blower or a twin screw blower with a short runner intake, it doesn't mirror exactly the same power curve as the NA motor. So if you have an NA motor like this LS with a long runner manifold like the Fast with the long runner sections in it, it's going to give you a curve and it's going to make peak power at 6,200 or so. If you put a big roots blower on there or a big twin screw blower on there, it's going to have a really short runner manifold. You know, they're going to be like this short. The problem with that is that, as we saw, we lose a bunch of power down low and can potentially gain power at the top. So you're going to completely change the curve with the change in runner length. And then on top of that, you're going to change it with the boost. and the boost that you're supplying from a roots blower like a TVS or a Whipple or a Kenny Bell is not going to be consistent. You're going to go through different efficiency ranges in the blower depending on the speed relative to the motor and the output, and the airflow relative to the torque curve, so airflow needs of the motor. So you can have boost that, like on roots blowers, sometimes you can have boost that's high at the beginning and in the middle and then falls off. You can have on a big blower, you can have just a rising curve that doesn't rise so much the same as a centrifugal, because it usually starts out higher. So when you lay into it at 2,500 RPM, let's say, there's already lots of boost there. And so it may rise from, if you're running 10 pounds, it may rise from 10 to 12 or 13, but it's not going to rise from 2 or 3 up to, 11 or 12 or 13. So the roots blower and the twin screw stuff has a different boost curve. And so the resulting power curve is definitely going to be different relative to the NA motor. So that was kind of a cool test. And I'm still wondering about the intake manifold on that. And I'm going to go back and take a look at it. So if you guys have anything you want to chime in about that, let me know. And make sure, well, I don't want you guys to leave and go see Steve, but he's good people though. So let's see what you guys got going on. Why did you ever finish the Cadillac blower on the 6? I'm sure you mean, why did you never finish it? I took apart the 6-liter to take pieces off and give them to somebody else. And so that's why that motor is not back together. More specifically, the CA625 head studs. And also, that motor has a water leak. And I'm not sure if I think it's coming up from the threads in the head studs. That's what we think. It might also be from the trick flow head, which we need to pressure test. So I need to figure out what's going on there. And I think that the CAD blower on the 6.0 is probably a belt slippage problem. Judging by what it did on the 4.8, it has more than enough. It has more than enough airflow to support the 6-liter. Omar, does boost allow an engine to rev higher with a rising boost curve? Yes, that's what we just covered. Yeah, on the centrifugal, it'll definitely do that. And you can also do that with a turbo. Like I said, if you have a boost controller, an electronic boost controller that you can reference to RPM, then you can create that. I'm still building my 6.0 with a goofy Cadillac blower. It will work fine. It'll be very torquey, and I'm sure that it can make, I'm thinking it can make like, 600 or 700 horsepower. Timothy, I want to see some real-world info on boosting a stock 98 4.3 S10. Not building a race check, just want to have some more power. I don't know about the stock ECU about that, but you can certainly put boost to that stock motor. Fusion needs a turbo for their Prius. Michael, so with a roots blower, you might want shorter runners to carry the higher end. Well, usually the shorter runners with the roots blower is more packaging, because a lot of times you can't package long runners and then the big blower on it. Freiberger did that with a tunnel ram, but if you have a blower, and especially if you add an intercooler brick to that and then a tunnel ram, it's gigantic. It's super high, so it's hard to package all of that stuff. That's normally why they do that. Don't compete with Uncle Tony on time slots. Mine's at 7, so mine's whenever it is. It's every day at 7. The 5.3 and 6.0 use the same block. They actually don't use the same block. I mean, dimensionally it's the same, but it's definitely a different block. And discuss ProCharger touching down. What caused it? I don't know what touching down means. Have you seen or tested the AC Delco? I don't know what that part number is. I don't know what that intake manifold is. Would a 3.8 Mustang support a 4-barrel carburetor 650? Yes, it would. Rick, it's the reason that centrifugals provide the power curve that they do is not because of leaks. It's just, a centrifugal is just the impeller from a turbo essentially, but it takes, because of how fast you have to spin that little impeller to get it to process air, and since the blower is connected to the engine has to speed up and get into an RPM range where eventually, because of all of the gear reductions that you have both in the blower and on the blower pulley and the crank pulley, you have to get that impeller up to the right speed where it becomes efficient. And that's at high RPM. That's why it doesn't make power down low. Tim, I just try 7 pounds and make sure that you can get for the boosting the 4.3 liter, just try 7 pounds and see what you can do with that. See if you can get the tune right and get the good air, a cold air to it, and get a good intercooler or like an air to air something on there and make that work, and then worry about going up with more boost. And then if you run it on E85 and everything's working and you can tune it properly, then you can go up and boost. Will changing exhaust routing to the turbo? It depends on how extensively you're changing it. Are you changing the flow rate of what you're doing dramatically? Mike, you can't use a blower with a stock cam? Does anybody know what the stock boost level was on a Cyclone or a Typhoon? Was it only like 10 or 12? What's cheaper to build, an auto or a manual transmission? I think at our wrecking yard, those are the same price. Lazy Hound Racing. So you're putting a 671 on the side of a 292. Then you want, the thing you would want on your 292 is equal runner length. And I would look at making them all around the length that the longest runner is on the factory manifold. James is here. Tom is here. Why? So the impeller is making contact with the housing. That could be a couple things. It could be a loose housing. Could be the bearings went bad inside. Could be that, and what it is a lot of times is, guys, it's not uncommon for guys to overspin those and try to get every last ounce of horsepower out of it. And then that creates problems. The other thing that people do quite often that causes that is, what was my, not having a bypass valve on it can create problems too. Would you put a Blueprint 540 power adder in a drag car? I would, but I would do a couple of changes to it. We put MLS head gaskets on it, and we also put head studs on it. And then I would also take a look at the valve springs and the camshaft. Michael, does the 3.8 make 200 horsepower? What's it rated at? Travis, boost will always be better than cubic inches for a 5.3. Lauren, I haven't run the Cadillac blower other than once on the 6-liter. Juice, it depends on what application you'd want to put the factory heads on. The heads that make the most power are the factory Recport LS3 heads. If you have a 6-liter, you can't put those on a 5.3. If you're going to put something on a 5.3, then you should put a 243 probably, or a 799 head on there. Any of the 6-liters will work, but I don't know about the swap, because there might be some that would be better from a swap perspective, like positioning the water pump correctly and things like that. And I'm not sure about that. Rick, are you talking about a big roots blower versus a centrifugal? Both are linked mechanically, except that the roots blower, the only drive ratio it has is based on the pulleys, and it spins very close at somewhere between a 1-to-1 and a 2-to-1 ratio. But a centrifugal blower is going to be spun at something closer to, let's say, 3 and 2, I don't know, 6 or 8-to-1 maybe. Sometimes more than that. And it doesn't provide the airflow that a roots blower is. One revolution of a big roots blower provides a lot of airflow. One revolution of a very small impeller provides very little airflow. So it isn't until you get that blower spinning really, really fast, which doesn't happen until you have lots of engine speed, because the engine is coupled to the spinning of the impeller. So it isn't until you have lots of engine speed. A turbo gets to do that nicely because it's spun by the exhaust. So it can actually spin up to the RPM that it needs to run at. Some of them run 100,000 RPM. You have to get a lot of impeller speed when you're talking about a small impeller. When you're talking about giant size roots rotors, you don't have to spin them very fast to process a lot of air. They're not very efficient, and they heat the air up a lot, and they take a lot of power to spin. And the others don't, not nearly as much, but they have to have a lot of RPM. Yes, Tim, 7 PSI or thereabouts, 7.5 PSI is going to give you near 50%. Fly, your LQ4 with 706 heads in the Trailblazer SS and an SS2 cam will work fine with boost for a ProCharger. So they ran 14 pounds of boost on the Typhoon and the Cyclone. Joaquin, I haven't ever read any tuning books, actually. All of my stuff comes from being at West Tech for, 25 years or more. So you went from stock manifolds and 6 feet of piping to the turbo into 2-inch forward headers right into the turbo. You might see a change in back pressure from that. So you might have to adjust the fuel flow a little bit. Okay, Baby Shark, you're here. We can start now. We've all been holding our breath until you got here. Strain TV, I upgraded to ARP connecting rod bolts and had the machine shop resize the connecting rods. Is that on an LS motor? Because if it is, you didn't really need to do that. Yeah, the 4.3s were the good ones were 200 horsepower, and those are actually fairly stout. The Big Bang Big Black Chevy. As a matter of fact, Freiberger contacted me today and asked me about wanted some ideas for Engine Masters shows, and that probably should be one of them. Yeah, Travis, I don't very rarely would I ever run pump gas. Sometimes when I do a pump gas versus race gas comparison or pump gas versus E85, if we run boost, we almost always run it on E85 anymore. Yeah, the Marine versions of the 4.3 had the good intake manifold, and also the Marine versions of the L31, the Vortec 350, also had the good intake manifold. LS6 with a BTR stage 2 cam. Do I need a new tune when I put on a fast LS6R intake? I would certainly hope so. It's going to make more power. Mike, you can go bigger in the camshaft on your 454 build if you're putting pistons in it that have valve reliefs. The reason that we had that cam in our Gen 6 motor is that we only had a certain amount of available piston to valve clearance with the factory piston. And so we couldn't put a really big camshaft in it. A 282 cam with decent heads on the 454 can make 1,000 horsepower with a turbo. So if you want something to do that, it will definitely do that. But you could put a bigger cam in. You could go up to that 300 BR14 that I run on a lot of stuff. That's a solid roller camshaft. Brian Man Hunter, thank you very much. Did you have a question, man? Just let me know. Tyrone, what's a good turbo for my 408 stroker? You just got to tell me what kind of power you want. It's going to be at least something that's like an S480 or something. Dan, I do remember the screw blowers. Those things were, and they run them. I thought that they still allowed them to run in top alcohol and that they couldn't run them in top fuel, but that might have been a long time ago that I had that conversation. Oh, Bryce, see, hey, Richard, love your videos. Going to be adding a very big cam to my 394 stroker, my 13 Ram 1500. I hope you got pistons with valve reliefs to be able to do that. And also make sure to check the cylinder heads, because you make sure you check retainer to seal clearance, and also the spring clearance too on some of the Dodge stuff. It gets kind of iffy. If I run the turbo through the MAF, will the computer compensate for fuel at 7 PSI? I don't think so. I mean, I think that there will be some compensation, but I get worried about forced induction stuff like that because it's fairly easy to top out these factory mass air meters because they're only designed within a certain flow range. And then once you get to that flow range, the meter's just topped out. And if you, by adding boost to it, getting a 50% jump in airflow that you might get when you're turbocharging or supercharging, you might run into topping the meter out. So I would definitely look out for that. I know on a lot of the old 5-liter Mustang stuff, and some of the other Ford stuff too, we'd have to go to a bigger meter, have it recalibrated. And in the later ones, they would do the mafia thing where they would split the signal in half and try to trick the mass air meter. Yeah, Dan, guys did overdrive the blowers. Yep. Lane, I don't have any idea about the 4.2 liter Ford SX V6. I don't think I have any experience with them. The rear mount turbo stuff, take a look at the videos I have up. I did a test on a rear mount. It obviously works fine. It's going to have a little bit more lag than a front mount is. And I think that I could have done a lot better job than I did. I did an extreme rear mount turbo with like 14 or 15 feet of tubing on a twin turbo deal with a pair of GT3582s. I think that they were, I can't remember which ones they were. I can't remember if they were from Max Speeding or if they were the earlier ones that I had. But most rear mounts are not rear mounts. I would call them mid mounts, and they're a lot closer than I made this setup. And so there was a lot of loss in temperature going through that much tubing. And also mine were exposed to air because the way that the air flows through the dyno cell, there's a lot of airflow. And so those were cooler than they would be when everything's tucked up under the car. And also, if I was doing it again, I would make the tubing smaller too for the rear mounts. They work fine. Tell Freiberger to do an L86 6.2 versus LS3. You have a running Iron Duke. Unfortunately, that's a lot. I can't have another motor right now. Travis, port 862 heads for 7 to 8 pounds of boost on the 5.3. Honestly, you don't need ported heads for 7 to 8 pounds of boost on a 5.3. Just put stock ones on it. Yes, 1,000 pound or 1,000 horsepower 454 will have lots of torque, Mike. I was just looking at somebody had asked me a question about GT45 turbos, and I was looking at the data from the big block where I ran twins on it, and the thing made like 1,000 foot-pounds of torque for like 2,000 or 3,000 RPM spread. Excuse me, it seemed like it was a very, very flat, long torque curve. Do you have any personal project cars? I have a couple. I have the Nova that I haven't done anything for a while. It's a 72. It doesn't have a motor in it right now. I have lots of motors, though, so that's not a problem. I have a 71 240Z. I have a 1988 5-liter Mustang. I have my truck, which I'm not going to do anything to, just leave it stock. It's actually very easy to pick the wrong cam. All you have to do is wear the shirt, and then you're good. Fly, I'm happy to help, man. Procharged Mopars here. I'm late. Let's talk Superchargers. Okay, Procharged Mopars. I actually, one of the things I suggested to Freiberger for the Engine Masters was, you know, running a turbo on the Magnum. Or actually, the one that I really think we should do on the Magnum rather than boost, because I don't know about sealing the lower part of the manifold, is I want to do an EFI versus carburation on it. So we'll see how that goes. Tyrone has a Texas Speed twin turbo camshaft. I'd like to reach 700 or more. If you're trying to reach 700 or more on a 408, an S480 is going to be more than enough, and you're going to have trouble only making 700 horsepower if that's the same one. Mike, you can use the solid roller in the hydraulic roller. Just got to make sure that the lifters that you use are correct. New question: LS motor or Hemi swap on a 215 Jeep? Doesn't the 215 Jeep Wrangler already have a Hemi in it? Probably has a 4-cylinder in it, right? Happy to help, Bri. Let me know how that thing goes, okay? Let me know how that buildup goes. Michael, I have videos up on stroking the 5.3. Normally, we do a 383. You do a 4-inch stroke and then a 3905 bore, and that works out pretty good. You can also do either one of those. You could put the 4-inch stroke in it. You could put a 3900 stroke in it. You could also bore it, go from a 5.3 to a 5.7, use factory 5.7 LS1 style pistons in it. There's lots of things that you can do to the 5.3. Still would like to see a more updated 4.6 2-valve test. Think junkyard 2-valve boost and Edelbrock intake. I don't. The Edelbrock intake is only going to be a little different from like the Reichert Racing or some of the other ones that we've run. I don't know how much different it's going to be. I would like to do a big bang on the 2-valve. Brenton, you ran tests on both blow-through and draw-through airflow meters on a Holden Nissan RB30. Nice. Turbo with unopened ECU. Nissan has a turbo engine that only came in one car, the Nissan Juke. Oh, that's cool. Tom, what size was that motor? A mirror running 12 pounds of boost on my Turbo 5.3 Sierra, looking to go 24 to 25 pounds. Should I change the factory intake manifold? The intake manifold won't hold you back. The speed of sound is not going to change dramatically in the motor. The speed of sound is going to be a function of elevation and temperature and stuff, but the temperature increase isn't enough to change it very much. That's why even under boost, the manifolds perform the same way. And since the reflected wave travels at the speed of sound up and down the runner length, that's why it comes back and arrives at the same time. Have you guys heard that the C8 Z06 is already set to have a flat plane crank? It's going to sound fancy, that's for sure. I do like Datsun Z cars and Datsun 510s and 3rd gen RX-7s. Kyle, the shirts aren't available yet. I'm working on it. Brenton, I don't know why you don't comment. Everybody else tells me that we ran the wrong cam. That's all good. So when are we seeing the L series up in the dyno with triple 48s? I don't think it had 48s. I think it probably had 40s on it. Actually, I was going to put an LS in that 240, and now after seeing the prices on the 240s, it's crazy. But I do have an RB25 that would look really nice in there. So, Travis, you're putting a 5.3 LM4 and a 72 Nova. I know. Cam and boost on the way. That's a good combination. Ooh, a 68 Rambler American. AMC 360. Your 84 Chrysler Laser may have a Hemi swap. Is it a turbo laser? Do you have the turbo motor laying around somewhere? The 4.6 2-valve can make 1,000 horsepower with a turbo. I've done that, but it was a modified one. Most power you can get out of a Vortec 350 L31. I don't know yet. I haven't done a big bang on that short block yet. I would never do a big bang on the L24. The guys back from Devendorf and Sharp and those guys that were racing them back with Paul Newman back in the day. They made lots of power with those things. David, if you're going to do a swap, I would do the cam swap with the motor out of the car. It'll be easier, and then put the motor in. The other stuff you can do after you've, because that you'd have to tear into it to do that. But put springs on it and put a cam in it, and then put it in, and then the Trailblazer SS intake manifold swap is all external stuff, so that's fairly easy. So Tom, it's a 1.6 liter. $464 horsepower with an L31 ported. Were they ported stock heads, like ported Vortec heads, 4-barrel? It had to be a big camshaft in there. I wonder how they fit the camshaft in there with available piston to valve clearance. "25 inches of vacuum." That's a real test for the security of the gaskets. The stock cam's not the wrong cam, though. Sometimes the stock cam's the right one. So, Mike, you're too tall to fit in a lot of those cars? I had that same problem. The Gen 3 RX-7 is maybe one of the best looking Japanese cars ever made. There, I said it. Yeah, they do. The 2.2s do tend to overheat. Bri, tell all the Hemi guys come on over, man. Those were the other videos that I suggested for David. I want to run boost on I call them Gen 4 Hemis, but it's the 5.7 Hemi that has variable cam and a variable intake. And I want to run, that's not my motor, so I can't do it, but I want to run boost on that. Or do an easy one would be boost on the Hemi, the early Hemi that I already have. Tom, 5.7 Hemi with a Holley high ram, adapter plate, intercooled M122 or 2.3 Eaton. Looking to see if there's any interest. I don't know. I don't know about the Hemi market for that. A high ram would be pretty tall, though, right? Tom, I've notched pistons on using the old Isky notching tool several times on stuff, and it works okay. I've even done it with just a Dremel. I did that on the Big Bang 351 with, well, it broke because of stuff that I did. But yeah, DFA, the EQ heads, they may have used the EQ heads for the Vortec. Paul wants to know if I ever run a 4.6 valve Ford Cobra as a 5-liter stroker. I've put together 5-liter strokers for 2 valves, but I don't think I ever did one as a 4 valve, though. Ever use a chainsaw or chisel to notch pistons? I'm not checked out on a chainsaw. They won't allow me to use it. Dan, that's going to be cool stuff. I've been to the Monterey Historic Races. This is way back when I think Chevrolet was a preferred mark. So all of the cool Corvettes, like the Grand Sports and all those things, were there. So the lightweight ones, that was kind of cool. But it would be great to see. I really love the Can-Am stuff too. 91730s, 91710s, the McLarens. I actually like the 917s more than I like the McLarens, but I like the McLarens too because of the crazy stacks and all that, and the shadows. I'll try to walk softly but carry a big stick. Oh, okay. Oh, the Holly low ram. I see, Tom. It's easy. Just click the like button. It's right down here. Just click it. I have a chainsaw, but it's an electric chainsaw from Harbor Freight. Kevin, you had a 76 282 plus 2 EFI with add-on oil filter. Nice. I had a 74 260, the early one, and as I remember right, the direction of the rear sway bar was different on that one. Some of them then went forward and some of them went back. Yeah, they did use the tennis balls in the injector stacks to stop birds and children from climbing in there. Yeah, Dan, should we do a budget build on a 917 5.4 liter? They have those just laying around. I saw 2 of them yesterday in the wrecking yard. Tom, I just have a long extension cord on it. Greg, a turbo would be better for a tow application because the Procharger is going to have a lot less boost down low. It's not going to have all of the boost until the very top of the RPM range. A turbo can have boost depending on how you size it. It can have all the boost a lot sooner. And we've seen stuff. If you take a look at the video that I have up where we compared the centrifugal to a turbo directly, I have a couple of them up that are like that. But you can see that in the low RPM ranges, 3,000 or 3,500 or so, the turbo can be up by 150 foot-pounds or more. It's a lot. Casey, 74 C10, keep the small block 400 or get a 5.3. A 5.3 is going to make more power than the 400 is. It's just not going to make the torque that a 400 does. It might make as much peak torque, but it won't make the low-speed torque that the 400 does. So there are lots of things you could do to 400, cam and heads and intake, but you have to look at, okay, if I've spent that amount of money, although you could go to the wrecking yard and get Vortec heads for it. Those would probably be pretty good. Dan, that's very cool. Number 2, 917 in Gulf livery. Nice. I got to sit in a 962 that they had at Osco, which was very cool. Greg, yeah, you'd have to be concerned about EGTs because if you're going to make more power, but you can tune that though. Yes, you're probably gonna have to drill steam ports on that, Casey. .660 still. It's like a man's chainsaw. You have a 917 124 slot car. Nice. They're still fast, especially if Donahue's driving. Yeah, I saw that Dodge gave the red eye chargers to the YouTuber guys that are out doing it. We don't have an adapter to put an air-cooled VW on the dyno. I'm sure that there's got to be stuff to make that happen, but we just have never done that at Westech. Yeah, they gave them money so they could make the necessary modifications for it. I'm sure a lot of guys are doing, everyone's spinning the blower faster, doing a blower upgrade. I'm sure everyone's going to run nitrous. Nice. Did the 919 break the record at the Nürburgring? I wonder what their guys that got those Dodges are going to do with the. I wonder what they're going to do with the trans and stuff. Making more power is really easy. If you put a bigger blower on there, spin it faster, all of that's very, very easy. I'd put a different camshaft in it, but can they do the programming that's necessary? And then also, when they do that, what happens to how well the trans is going to react to that? Because if all of that stuff doesn't cooperate, making 1,000 horsepower or 1,200 to 15 or whatever, I hope somebody puts turbos on it, but I don't know that they will. I'll have to take a look at that, Tim. 450 from a 350 is a fairly good bit of power with stock piston to valve, and especially with a stock Vortec head. That's cool, Dan, to be able to talk to those guys talk to those crew chiefs. Mr. Baggy, I'm glad we could help. LQ4 cam intake, that's going to be good stuff. William, do you have an air fuel meter to put on there to test it and see what's going on? The fuel mileage shouldn't drop very much driving around unless something's going on. Oh, Dulcich has not ported. Not ported that much. Yeah, did he say I didn't port them? The E85 blow through carb that was running lean on the blow through. If it's the one I think you're talking about, is it the twin supercharged one? If that's it, then it's the fuel feed from the dyno. 2.5 minutes. Bull porting is easy. Iron heads, it's still a fairly good bit of work though. The Vortec heads have enough to support. I mean, they'll flow over 200 CFM, so they have enough to support 400 horsepower. It's just that you need to modify the head to get enough spring and to get enough lift movement in the head, and then that's a lot of work to try to make. That's a lot of power. Then you put a single plane intake manifold, and can you put enough camshaft in it to take advantage of the single plane so that you can make that 420, 30, 40, 50 horsepower, whatever it is, out on the top? It's not easy. Have you done anything with the Nissan SR20? SR20s, yes, but not the KA24, and not on the engine dyno, only on the chassis dyno. Oh, Randall, you have a signed copy of Donahue's book. That's cool. Yeah, the valve guides have to be cut. So, Dan, what doesn't a stock Vortec head flow 210 or 220 or something? I mean, it's not that much though, right? Oh, mail order short block. Okay. $230 is a lot. Ford 400 doesn't have that much in terms of aftermarket boost. Any suggestions? You can boost any motor, so boosting a forward is not a problem. Boosting the 400M, that's what I call them. Everybody gets mad, but that's what I call them. So you can do that. There are intake manifolds for them. There are carburetors for them. There are blow-through carburetors that you can use. You could put a set of Cleveland heads on it, and then just add boost to it. And if you have to make your own manifolds or use stock exhaust manifolds to run to the turbo, you certainly could do that. Thank you, Brian. I'm glad you're here. Stock Vortec 184 valve flow 195 to 200. Cleaned up, you can get 230. That's what I was thinking. I thought stock ones were in the low 200s. I thought that they were better than Fuelie heads. Dan, have you ever ported a set of the Magnum heads? Will be beneficial to install an oil catch can on my Explorer Sport EcoBoost. I don't know. Are you having a problem with that? You're going to have to be clever in the routing, because that engine is going to be sealed. So it's not going to like having an open vent to a valve cover. Oh, 500. Well, and they're not going to, a Vortec, it doesn't flow better at 600, right? Vizard has a Vortec head that flows 263 CFM. That's good. You're getting oil residue in your intake. That's fairly normal. That's part of the PCV system working. If you look inside any LS intake manifold, you're going to have a lot of it. You could pour it out sometimes. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you for all for showing up. If you haven't taken a look, make sure go take a look at the video that I posted today on intake manifolds, because obviously it's all kind of fancy stuff. Plus, I make car noises. Whoop! I have to learn to make different car noises. I'm gonna have to learn like a rotary and a turbo and then a flat crank for all the flat crank fans. I got some dog hair floating around trying to get me. Thank you guys for showing up. I will be back tomorrow.